He was just a teenager, standing outside the mall waiting for his dad. But to one cop, that made him suspicious. In less than 5 minutes, he was handcuffed, humiliated, and treated like a criminal, just for being black. But then, the ground shook. A sound roared through the sky. A military jet came out of nowhere. And when it landed, it started like any ordinary afternoon until it turned into a nightmare. 15-year-old Jamal stood outside the local mall, backpack slung over one shoulder, scrolling through music on his phone. School had just ended, and his dad, always a little late, was on his way to pick him up. It was the kind of day where nothing seemed out of place. The sun peeked through scattered clouds, cars rolled by, and the world felt normal. Jamal wasn't bothering anyone. He was just waiting, like countless other teens had before him in that same spot. Earbuds in, hoodie up, nodding softly to the rhythm. That's all. But peace has a way of shattering when judgment walks in. Flashing red and blue lights bathed the sidewalk in sudden color. Tires screeched slightly as a police cruiser pulled up. The door slammed open, and a white officer stepped out, eyes narrowed, voice sharp. "Hey, you! What are you doing here?" Jamal pulled out one earbud, confused. "I'm just waiting for my ride, sir." The officer took a step closer, already suspicious. "This area isn't for loitering. You don't belong here. Hands behind your back." Jamal's heart dropped. "What? Sir, I haven't done anything." But before the words could even leave his mouth, the officer had spun him around, metal cuffs clicking tight around his wrists. The cold steel bit into his skin. His phone slipped from his hands and hit the ground. The noise, the sound of metal locking, the voice of authority barking orders grabbed people's attention. A few pedestrians slowed down. A woman whispered to her friend. One teen across the street pulled out her phone and started filming, and Jamal just stood there, breath caught in his chest. Was he being arrested? For what? For waiting? Wave of shame and helplessness washed over him. The kind of shame that doesn't come from doing wrong, but from being treated like you already have. His lips trembled, not because he was weak, but because he was scared. And because this wasn't the first time someone looked at his skin and assumed the worst. "Sir, please," he tried again. "I'm a student. My dad is coming to get me." "I'm not here for your stories," the officer cut him off. "You people are always up to something. You people." Those two words stung more than the cuffs ever could. It wasn't just about today. It was about everything he'd learned growing up black in America. That sometimes, it didn't matter how polite you were, or how good your grades were, or how many times your mom told you to always keep your hands visible and speak respectfully. Sometimes you were just wrong in someone else's eyes, and there was nothing you could do to change that in the moment. He tried not to cry. He told himself to be strong. But the tightness in his chest wouldn't go away. The officer talked into his radio, describing him as a suspicious male loitering outside mall property, as if standing still while black was a threat. Nearby, a woman tried to speak up. "Officer, I saw him earlier. He's just a student, he's not bothering anyone." But the officer ignored her, brushing past the truth like it didn't matter. Jamal felt exposed, humiliated. He wished his dad would hurry. He wished someone, anyone, would listen. And most of all, he wished he wasn't so used to this. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Please, Dad, please get here soon." Little did he know the sound that would soon fill the sky wasn't a car engine. It was something far louder and far more powerful. But in that moment, all he could feel was the sting of injustice and the weight of being a child in a world too ready to fear him. Officer Grant pressed the button on his shoulder radio, his tone calm but loaded with bias. "Dispatch, I've got a suspicious black male teen loitering near the mall entrance, possibly casing the area. Proceeding with detainment." Jamal's mouth went dry. "Suspicious?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "I told you. I'm waiting for my dad. He's on his way." Grant didn't even acknowledge what Jamal said. He just scoffed and rolled his eyes, as if he'd heard this 1,000 times before. "Sure, and I'm the president," he muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You kids think you can hang around wherever you want and act like you own the place." Jamal felt the heat rise in his face. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't causing any trouble. He was just waiting, just like anyone else would. But he already knew. It didn't matter what he said. Behind him, a small crowd had started to gather. People watched from a distance, some curious, some uncomfortable, some filming with their, phones. His backpack lay forgotten on the ground, one of the straps twisted beneath itself like a collapsed limb. A young woman, no older than 20, stepped forward from the crowd. She picked up the bag carefully, holding it up as if it were proof of Jamal's innocence. "That's his school bag," she said, her voice strong but cautious. "He's clearly just a student. I saw him here earlier. He wasn't bothering anyone." Officer Grant glanced at her but didn't respond. He snatched the bag from her hand and turned back toward his cruiser. "You people always have an excuse," he muttered. Those words echoed louder than the sirens in Jamal's head. "You people." Jamal flinched, not because he didn't understand, but because he did. Perfectly. That phrase wasn't about him being a student. It wasn't about loitering. It was about the color of his skin. It was about the quiet judgments, the assumptions, the fear people carried in their eyes before they even heard him speak. Jamal bit his lip hard, trying to hold it together. He wasn't going to cry, not in front of them, not in front of this officer who didn't even see him as human. He stared at the pavement, blinking quickly, trying to ground himself. He thought of his mom's voice the night before. "Remember what we talked about. Always be respectful. Always keep your hands visible. And no sudden moves, baby." He thought of his dad, always calm and strong, telling him, "It's not fair, son, but the world isn't always ready to see your worth. So until it does, you stay sharp. You stay safe." He had listened. He had followed every rule. He'd done everything right. And yet, here he was, being treated like a criminal for simply existing while black. The people watching didn't know him. They didn't know he was an honor student, that he loved science and sketching sneakers in his notebook, that he volunteered at the community center every other Saturday, that he'd never once gotten detention. They just saw a young black teen in cuffs. He felt small, powerless, like the world had made up its mind about him without even asking who he was. "Please," he tried again, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't do anything." But Officer Grant wasn't listening. He was already opening the door to the back seat of the squad car, and as Jamal took a shaky step forward, the cuffs tugging against his wrists, he silently begged, "Dad, please, get here, now!" He had no idea that help was already in the sky, and justice was coming faster than anyone could imagine. Just as Officer Grant tightened his grip on Jamal's arm and reached to open the squad car door, a sudden, deep rumble shook the air. The sound was unlike anything the mall had ever heard. The ground vibrated. Storefront windows rattled. A few people stumbled back, shielding their eyes as they looked to the sky. Car alarms screamed across the parking lot. Then someone shouted, "Yo, what is that?" Above them, cutting through the clouds, came the silhouette of something massive and fast. A sleek black military fighter jet, roaring across the sky like a storm. It dipped lower and lower, defying belief. Everyone froze. The jet wasn't flying. Over. It was landing. The chaos of the moment turned into stunned silence as the fighter jet hovered over the far end of the mall's service road. Two black military vehicles with flashing lights sped up alongside it, blocking off the area. The jet eased down with precision, its engines kicking up leaves and dust into spiraling clouds. People were filming, gasping, pointing. Jamal blinked up through watery eyes. For a second, he thought he was imagining it, hallucinating from fear and humiliation. But then he recognized the symbol on the tail wing. He knew that jet. The cockpit hissed open. Out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered man in full decorated military uniform, his posture straight, his boots firm, his chest lined with glittering medals and patches of honor. His skin was dark and his expression stone cold. It was the face of a man who had seen war and wasn't about to let his son be disrespected on home soil. Two armed security officers flanked him as he walked toward the crowd with calm, commanding purpose. People parted like waves. Even the bystanders stopped filming and stepped aside instinctively, unsure whether to salute or stay back. Officer Grant's mouth hung open. Who is that?" he stammered, his voice suddenly small. "Jamal," still. Cuffed, wiped a tear from his cheek and stood a little taller. There was a trembling smile forming at the corners of his mouth. "That's my dad," he said quietly, but proudly. "Colonel David King, U.S. Air Force." Grant visibly paled. Colonel King didn't say a word at first. He just walked straight, up to Officer Grant and stopped inches away from him. His eyes didn't blink. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm, but deadly sharp. "Is there a reason my son is in handcuffs?" Grant stuttered, fumbling with his words. I thought he was loitering. He looked suspicious, and He was waiting for me." The colonel cut in, his voice louder now. "You racially profiled a 15-year-old boy standing on public property." He turned to Jamal, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "You okay, son?" Jamal nodded, barely able to speak. The pain, the fear, it was all still there. But now it was overpowered by something else. Pride. Colonel King turned back to Grant. "Remove the cuffs, now." "Yes, sir," Grant said immediately, scrambling. To obey. His hands shook as he unlocked the handcuffs and stepped back. The colonel didn't even spare him another glance. Instead, he turned to the crowd. "This is what injustice looks like. A child harassed while waiting for his ride home. We serve overseas to protect freedom. But what good is that if our own kids aren't safe in their own country?" A murmur swept through the onlookers. Some clapped. Others lowered their phones. Two moved to record. Jamal looked up at his father, his eyes wide with admiration. And for the first time that day, he felt seen. He felt safe. And most of all, he felt proud to be his son. The officer froze as the imposing figure of Colonel David Washington closed the distance between them. His boots echoed against the concrete with each deliberate step. "Sir, I didn't know," Officer Grant began, his hands twitching nervously. The colonel's voice sliced through the air like steel. "Didn't know what, officer?" he barked. "That you were harassing my son? That you handcuffed a child who was standing quietly, doing absolutely nothing wrong?" Grant stumbled over his words. I thought he was loitering. He looked suspicious." Colonel Washington raised a hand, sharply. It wasn't a physical strike, but it landed like one. The air itself seemed to still around him. "So standing, outside a mall while black makes someone suspicious? Is that your department's policy now?" The crowd gasped. Several people had started recording again. The tension was now electrified. Eyes bounced between Grant's crumbling posture and the colonel's unflinching stance. Grant's throat bobbed. No, sir. I didn't mean—" The colonel stepped closer. "You didn't mean to judge him based on his skin color? You didn't mean to put your hands on my child in front of strangers? You didn't mean to scar him emotionally while doing absolutely nothing wrong?" Jamal stood silently nearby, his wrists still marked red from the cuffs. His eyes were locked on his father. A mix of disbelief and pride flooding his face. The officer's voice cracked. "It was a misunderstanding. I was just trying to—" "What you were trying to do," the colonel interrupted, "was assert power over a defenseless teenager because of a prejudice you haven't unlearned. You didn't even ask for ID. You didn't ask a single question. You judged. You cuffed. You humiliated." More phones were out now. The crowd had doubled in size. Whispers turned into murmurs of outrage. The same young woman who had tried to defend Jamal earlier stepped forward. Her voice was stronger this time, charged with emotion. "Say it again, Colonel. We saw everything. He had no reason to touch. That boy." Colonel Washington didn't raise his voice, but his tone dropped into something colder, heavier. "Do you know who I am, Officer Grant?" Grant blinked. "You're Colonel Washington." "I'm not just a colonel," he said. Slowly, "I'm the head of Tactical Air Command. I've briefed presidents. I've overseen missions across 5 continents. And today I watched my son be treated like a threat in his own country because he was waiting outside a mall, because of his skin." The officer lowered his gaze. The colonel turned to Jamal, his expression softening for the first time. With careful hands, he pulled out a small key from his pocket and removed the cuffs himself. He didn't rush. He moved gently, like a father fixing something that never should have been broken. "You're safe now, son," he said quietly. Jamal's eyes welled with tears. His dad wasn't just his hero. He was everyone's hero in that moment. And yet here he was, kneeling in front of him, treating him not like a case, not like a story, but like his boy, his son. The crowd clapped. A few people chanted, "Justice for Jamal!" Others shouted at Officer Grant, who now looked like he wanted to vanish into the pavement. Colonel Washington stood and faced the growing crowd. "This ends today. Not just for my son, but for every black kid who's ever been treated like they don't belong." He looked Officer Grant dead in the eye. "I expect a full written apology and internal review, or the next time I land a jet, it'll be at City Hall." The message was clear. Justice had landed. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. Clips of the fighter jet landing behind the mall. The confrontation between Colonel Washington and Officer Grant. Jamal's calm but heart-wrenching declaration, "That's my dad." The headline that shook the internet, "Black teen arrested for waiting until his dad shows up in a military jet." Within hours, the story was trending on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Hashtags like "Justice for Jamal," "Colonel came through," and "While Black" flooded timelines. News anchors debated the incident across every major network. Some called it a perfect example of the dangers of racial profiling. Others asked, what would have happened if no one had recorded it? If his father hadn't arrived in time? Talk shows invited legal experts, activists, and even former officers to unpack the moment. For many viewers, it was a wake-up call. The public pressure was instant and fierce. By midday, Officer Grant was placed on immediate leave, pending an internal investigation. The local police department issued an official apology, admitting that protocols were not followed and that a full review and retraining on racial bias and profiling will begin immediately. But it wasn't just about one officer. The conversation had shifted nationwide. Jamal, who had spent the next few days quietly recovering at home, suddenly found himself thrust into the spotlight. Reporters called, activists wanted to talk, but he didn't speak publicly, not right away. He waited, he listened. And then, 1 week later, he stood on stage at a youth-led justice rally, surrounded by students, parents, and educators holding signs that read, "We belong here and kids deserve safety, not suspicion." Wearing a simple hoodie and jeans, Jamal stepped up to the mic. The crowd quieted. "My name is Jamal Washington," he began, voice steady. "And a week ago, I was arrested for standing outside a mall. Not for stealing, not for fighting, just waiting." He paused, then added, "I wasn't scared, because I knew who my father was. I knew he would come for me. I knew I'd be okay."